I slept with men and women from my church, not because I loved them, not because I wanted a relationship with them, and not because I was lonely, because every encounter gave me power. Every person who shared a bed with me became part of a ritual they knew nothing about. Some came to me for prayer, some came for prophecy, some came because they believed I was a woman chosen by God. But behind every miracle they celebrated, behind every prophecy that seemed accurate, and behind every testimony that made people call me a powerful prophetess, was a secret I had sworn never to reveal. You see, every time I slept with one of my church members, something was taken from them and something was added to me. What the members never knew was that the source of my power was not in my church, it was not on my altar, and it was not in the Bible I carried every Sunday. The source of that power was beneath the sea. Years ago, I entered a world I had only heard about in whispers, a place hidden beneath the waters, a place where promises were made, a place where covenants were exchanged, a place I should never have entered. When I came back, I was no longer the same woman. The dreams began, the visitations began, and before long, the members of my own church became sacrifices in a system they could not see. For years, I kept that secret buried until I watched the man who introduced me to that life die a slow and terrifying death. That was the moment I realized that one day, my own ending will be no different. Today, I am no longer a prophetess. I no longer lead a church, and for the first time in my life, I am going to tell you the truth about the woman I met beneath the sea, the covenant I made, and why I ended up sleeping with the very people who trusted me most. This is my confession. The first time it happened, I thought it was just another dream. At least that is what I told myself when I woke up. But deep down, I knew it was different. I had experienced dreams before. This was not a dream. It felt too real. I remember lying in my room that night after a church service. I was exhausted and fell asleep almost immediately. Then suddenly, I found myself standing on a shoreline I had never seen before. The sky looked strange. The air felt different. Everything around me seemed brighter than normal. At first, I thought I was dreaming about a beautiful coastal town. But then I noticed something impossible. There were no waves. The water was completely still, not moving, just stretching endlessly into the distance. As I stood there trying to understand where I was, I saw a woman walking towards me. She was dressed entirely in white. She appeared calm, confident, almost as if she had been expecting me. The strange thing was that I wasn't afraid. I felt drawn to her. The closer she came, the more familiar she seemed. Not familiar because I knew her, familiar because it felt as though she already knew everything about me. She stopped a few steps away and smiled. Then she said something that immediately caught my attention. She mentioned details about my life that nobody else knew. My struggles, my frustrations, my private prayers, the disappointments I had never shared with anyone. She spoke as if she had been listening to me for years. Before I could ask who she was, she turned and began walking toward the water. Then she looked back and motioned for me to follow her. I followed. The moment my feet touched the water, something happened that made no sense. I didn't sink. I didn't struggle to breathe. I simply continued moving forward. Then the world around me changed. The shoreline disappeared. The darkness disappeared. And suddenly, I found myself in a place that looked like a city beneath the sea. The buildings were beautiful. The streets seemed endless. Everything around me looked wealthy, peaceful, and alive. People moved about as if it were completely normal. No one seemed surprised to see me. It was as though I had entered a world that already knew my name. The woman led me through that city without speaking. Eventually, we arrived at a large building unlike anything else around it. She stopped outside the entrance and finally turned toward me. For the first time, her expression became serious. Then she asked me a question that would change the rest of my life. She asked me whether I was satisfied with the life I was living, whether I was satisfied with my ministry, whether I was satisfied watching others rise while I remained where I was. The question struck me because it touched a frustration I had carried for years. Before I could answer, she made me a promise. She told me that everything I had desired was possible. Influence, recognition, power, followers, the ability to see what others could not see, the ability to know things before they happened, the ability to attract people wherever I went. But she said those things would not come freely, for everything had a price. Then she told me that if I accepted what was being offered, my life would never remain the same. I listened because the promises sounded exactly like the answers I had been searching for. And before that encounter ended, I made a decision that would follow me for the rest of my life. A decision whose true cost I would only discover years later. The moment I agreed to listen to her, the atmosphere around us changed. Until that point, I had been distracted by the beauty of the place, the people moving about as though they had no worries. But after I accepted her invitation to continue, I began noticing things I had missed before. The city was beautiful, but it did not feel natural. Everything seemed perfect, too perfect. Nobody appeared old. Nobody looked sick. Nobody looked tired. The people I saw moved with purpose, but there was something strange about their faces. They smiled often, yet their eyes seemed empty, as if they were hiding something. The woman continued leading me. The further we went, the quieter everything became. Eventually, we reached a large building, surrounded by people dressed in white. Unlike the others, these people stopped what they were doing when they saw me. They stared, not with surprise, but with recognition, almost as though they had been expecting me. The woman led me inside. The building was unlike anything I had ever seen. The walls seemed to glow. The floors reflected light like polished glass. Everything around me looked expensive beyond imagination. At the center of the room stood a seat larger than any chair I had ever seen. It looked more like a throne. The woman asked me to sit. When I hesitated, she smiled. Then she began speaking about my life. Not in general terms, in detail. She spoke again about my frustration with my ministry. And then she spoke about opportunities I believed had been stolen from me. And by then, I was no longer questioning how she knew these things. I was listening because for the first time, I felt understood. Then she made her offer. She told me that my life could change, that people would seek me out, that my name would spread, that I would become known for unusual spiritual gifts. Then she explained the condition. She said power must be maintained. It could not simply be received and forgotten. It required loyalty, it required obedience, and it required participation. At that moment, I should have asked questions. Instead, I was listening. I was already imagining the future she had described. I was already seeing the crowds, the testimonies, the recognition, the influence. The woman noticed my excitement. She smiled again. Then she stretched out her hand. When I touched it, I felt a strange sensation move through my body. Not pain, not fear, just a feeling I could not explain, almost as though something had changed. The moment it happened, the city around me began fading. The buildings disappeared, the people disappeared, the light disappeared. Everything became dark. Then I woke up. I was back in my room. For several minutes, I sat on my bed trying to understand what had happened. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as a dream, but something felt different. The experience felt too real. The details were too clear. The emotions were too strong. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Weeks passed. Then one night, the woman appeared again. This time, I wasn't beneath the sea. I was in my own room. At first, I thought I was imagining things. I closed my eyes, opened them again. She was still there, standing quietly in the corner, watching me. I felt the same strange calmness I had felt beneath the sea. She didn't speak for long. She simply reminded me that our agreement had begun. Then she disappeared. That was when fear finally entered my heart. I needed answers, and there was only one person I believe could explain what was happening. The man who had introduced me to certain spiritual circles years earlier. The man I now refer to as my mentor. I went to the man and told him everything. He listened carefully without interrupting me. I expected him to tell me I was imagining things. Instead, he nodded, as though he had heard the story many times before. Then he asked me a question. He asked whether the woman had appeared dressed in white. When I said yes, his expression changed. He became very serious. That was the moment I realized this was not unique to me. Others had walked this path before. Others had accepted similar offers. Then my mentor explained that the encounter beneath the sea was not random. According to him, it was the source of the power many people secretly sought. The visions, the revelations, the influence, the unusual spiritual manifestations. He spoke as if discussing something completely normal, as if this world existed alongside ours, and certain people had learned how to access it. I asked him whether I should be worried. Then he said something I will never forget. He said that once a person accepts the invitation, the real test is not receiving the power. The real test is keeping it. At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant, but I was about to learn, because not long after that conversation, the woman returned, and this time, she came with instructions. The first instruction came only a few weeks after my conversation with my mentor. By then, my ministry had already started changing. People began arriving at services in numbers I had never seen before. Visitors brought friends. Those friends brought relatives. Before long, the small gatherings I used to struggle to organize were becoming crowded meetings. At first, I was excited. I believed the promises were coming true. Then, the dreams started. The woman from beneath the sea began appearing more frequently. Sometimes she appeared while I slept. Sometimes I would wake up feeling as though she had been standing beside my bed. Each time she came, the message was the same. The power had to be maintained. At first, I did not understand what that meant. Then the instructions became more specific. The woman told me that certain people who entered my life carried something I needed. She never explained it in ordinary language. She simply made it clear that close personal relationships with those individuals would strengthen the power operating through me. The first time it happened, I argued with myself for days. I knew it was wrong. I knew it crossed every boundary I had preached about. But I also noticed something else. Every time I followed those instructions, my ministry seemed to grow even faster. The visions became clearer. The prophecies became more accurate. People began calling me powerful. The more these testimonies spread, the more people arrived. And the more people arrived, the harder it became to walk away. What began as isolated incidents gradually became a pattern. Church members who trusted me became entangled in relationships they did not fully understand. Some were men, some were women, and I started having immoral acts with them, having romantic affairs with whoever came close to me. All of them believed they were dealing with a spiritual leader, None of them knew what was happening behind the scenes. As time passed, secrecy became part of my daily life. Meetings that appeared innocent to outsiders often carried motives I could never publicly admit. Sometimes, arrangements were made in private locations far away from the church. Sometimes I traveled under the excuse of ministry assignments just to engage with persons in such romantic ways. The double life became exhausting, yet every time I considered stopping, fear took over, because by then I believed something terrifying. I believed that if I stopped obeying, everything would disappear. The crowds, the influence, the reputation, and for that reason, I continued. And that was when I realized I was no longer making free choices. The instructions were becoming more frequent. The pressure was becoming stronger. The dreams became impossible to ignore. There were moments when I would look at myself in the mirror and barely recognize the person staring back at me. The woman who had once entered ministry hoping to serve God had become someone else entirely. Someone trapped, someone controlled by fear, someone constantly chasing the next confirmation that the power had not left. By then, I was no longer maintaining the covenant. The covenant was maintaining me. And deep down, I knew something even worse. The power everyone admired was not making me stronger. It was slowly taking away my freedom. I had gained influence. I had gained recognition. I had gained everything I once thought I wanted. But I was becoming a prisoner of the very thing that had given it to me. And for the first time, I began wondering what would happen if I ever tried to walk away. Now, let me tell you how it all began. Looking back now, I can see that my downfall did not begin beneath the sea. It began long before that. It began with disappointment. Before people knew my name, I was just another young woman trying to build a ministry. I spent years praying, attending conferences, learning from senior ministers. I sacrificed almost everything to pursue that calling. But nothing seemed to move. I watched people who had started after me become successful. Their churches expanded. Their influence increased. Their names became known. Meanwhile, I kept struggling to fill even a small hall. The hardest part was not the lack of money. It was the feeling of being forgotten. Every year, I convinced myself that the breakthrough would come. Every year, I was disappointed. Slowly, frustration began replacing contentment. I started comparing my life to everyone else's. Instead of focusing on my calling, I became obsessed with results. I wanted recognition. I wanted influence. I wanted people to know my name. At the time, I justified those desires by telling myself they would help me reach more souls. But deep down, part of me simply wanted what others had. That was the weakness the woman beneath the sea recognized immediately. She saw what I refused to admit. I was hungry for significance, hungry for attention, hungry for the kind of power that would make people stop overlooking me. That is why her promises worked. She wasn't offering me something I hated. She was offering me exactly what I wanted. And because I never confronted that weakness, I became vulnerable to it. By the time I realized the true cause of what I had accepted, I was already trapped. And that is why I made the decision that changed my life forever. For years, I continued living that double life. Outwardly, I looked successful. People admired me. People trusted me. People believed I had a special connection with God. But inside, I was becoming more afraid with every passing year. Then one day, I received news that shook me more than anything else. My mentor had died. When I first heard it, I expected an ordinary explanation. Instead, I learned that the final months of his life had been filled with fear, confusion, and suffering. The man who had once appeared so confident died terrified. That news stayed with me because for the first time, I saw my own future. I realized that If I continue on the same path, my ending might be no different. Everything I had gained suddenly felt worthless. The influence, the crowd, the reputation, none of it could give me peace, not anymore. So within a short period, I stepped away from active ministry. I handed leadership responsibilities to others and withdrew from the position people had known me for. Many never understood why. Some believed I was tired. Others assumed I had personal issues. But the truth was much deeper. I was afraid of where the road would eventually lead. Today, years later, I no longer tell this story to shock people. I tell it because I know what desperation can do to a person. The most dangerous temptations are often the ones that promise exactly what you desire most. If there is one lesson my life has taught me, it is this: not every door that opens should be entered. Not every promise should be accepted. And no amount of influence, recognition, or power is worth losing yourself. I cannot change the decisions I made. I cannot undo the people I hurt, but I can tell the truth. And this confession is my attempt to do exactly that. This is my story, and this is my warning.